All right, so if you would all take a nice deep breath, plant your feet, relax your body, open your mind. Eternal brothers and sisters, we are now about to open a Church-alike meeting in the customary manner, and in so doing, let us consider seriously the purpose in which we are here gathered together. The purpose which, since the dawn of human intelligence, has drawn true brothers and sisters of the light into holy convocation, the purpose which during all ages has attracted the spiritual efflorescence of every epoch together at selected meeting places. The purpose which has ever impelled the noblest and most exalted souls of earth to band together for a common effort. That purpose is to study nature's laws, to unfold the divine attributes of the soul, to secure conscious immortality, and to attain the royal grandeur that surrounds the true perfected human. I will skip to the prayer. O thou eternal spirit, in whom we live, move, breathe, and have our being. Consecrate this meeting for the cause of truth and righteousness. As brothers and sisters of the light, we seek knowledge at thy shrine of goodness. Therefore, by virtue of our unselfishness and sincerity in desiring to assist in thy works, we ask the help of legions of light and their protection from all forces of darkness. So shall it be.
Shall it be. Very good. Well, thank you, Vega. And I appreciate you all coming either to participate in this in a live session, or for those of you who are viewing it at a later time, these again are not to replace your self-study. These are not necessarily geared to help you pass the course, though the information particularly today is covered within the tests for those who are pursuing the Hermetician designation. But this is more about the practical aspects of how to use the knowledge in a constructive way and in a positive way for your own practice and benefit, and for the benefit of others. Remember that part of being a Hermetician or understanding the Hermetic arts is not just for personal benefit, though you do gain from this. The more that you give to others, the more that you reach out to others and minister to others, the more that comes back to you. So this is really about giving without expectation of return. Because I promise you that my experience has shown, and experience of many others, is that the more you do give out and share information and help others, the more this comes back to you. So as you can see by the agenda today, we did have our announcements, greetings, introductions, and just completed the opening ceremony. We will be doing Book 8 course overview. We will then have a closing ceremony, and then we will stop the recording and take any questions and answers. If you do have questions, you are encouraged to ask, but if you could save these up for the end, it would be helpful. Now, I haven't said this in so many words in the previous courses, but I really want to emphasize our view of astrology, especially this esoteric form of astrology. It is not necessarily about firm future prediction. We believe that the future is very dynamic and that there are a number of possibilities because of influences. And what we see astrology, what we see the tarot, what we see the various and sundry practices under this is for us to better understand ourselves and the external forces that are influencing and having influence over us and influencing, if you will, the future. So while you may cast a chart, while you may do a card spread of the tarot, and it shows a situation, event, or a circumstance that may not come to pass, mainly because there are other dynamics at play, but that there are influences that presents possibilities. So we do believe, and we encourage you to look at the environment become careful and and take action about the environment that's around you, and the elements of other people, of places, of things, of the universe, of weather, of all these different aspects that are reflected in as above, so below. We also find that these external forces and everything we come in contact with exerts significant influence on both the inner and outer planes, the physical and the spiritual. They are not separated. They are very much tied together, because we also know that by using what we've talked about already, and we will talk about more in the future, directed thinking, and we had a whole course on spiritual alchemy. These are just two of the methods that we've discussed so far that allow us to both optimize the potential of the positive and minimize the negative influences that we face. Keep this information just kind of in the back of your mind, because so many people look and misunderstand astrology as being divination. And while there may be aspects of it that are fortune telling or are saying what the future is, well, it's really what the future could be. So we have a more scientific approach, as Zane talks about, in how that we take apart, how we analyze, and again, how we influence. And that's probably one of the most important aspects. So this book is a bit of a misnomer. There are only 2 chapters, only 2, that deal with Horary Astrology. The rest of it deals with how to understand and use the information of a chart in general, not specifically Horary. Now, I think part of the reason for that is, and we'll talk about it a little bit, is that you'll see a lot of similarities between the use of the Sacred Tarot and a Horary chart in terms of the information that's gained. But it is the principles that you use to interpret these charts that really is more universal. So there are, right there at the beginning of chapter 1, which is serial lesson 87, and I put 78, my dyslexia got there, serial lesson 87, published in 1930, and 77, that we see that there is a series of charts that you really should commit to memory. Now, one of the best ways that I found to do this, and I've said this in previous lectures, is to have a 3-ring loose leaf notebook divided up into various sections. And one section that we've not talked about is not specific any astral body or planet, but how to set up a chart or how to interpret information. More of the how-tos, because there are 4 tables located in this chapter 1, and that's serial lesson 87, that should be committed. The table of essential dignities, the table of incidental dignities, table of aspects and their orbs, and how the aspects express. And we're going to talk specifically about these because it's important that you are methodical in your approach. The more you are consistent in how you cast a chart, how you put it together, and how you analyze it, the more consistent you will find the results. I found that I was very much tempted, and I'm sure that if you haven't been, you will be, to kind of jump around and say, well, maybe I'll start here, maybe I'll start there, maybe I'll put this together, maybe I'll start by understanding this. No, I really encourage you to use the methodology, at least for now, that he recommends. Become proficient at the methodology that Zane gives us, and then make any adaptations later on once you've gained your proficiency and you have established your practice. You may find that you deviate very little from the methodology he gives. And then again, you may add or subtract some things. But I believe that what he gives us and what we will go through today are, if you will, the basics of how to approach a chart and how to understand it regardless of its types. So let's kind of delve into this. This really, I think, is important. First is, in terms of judging any horoscope, is that you want to take a look at the vibratory rate or the tone that is represented by all of the astral bodies and aspects. This was covered in detail in book or course 2, chapter 3, serial lesson 47. And this would be an excellent time to go back and review that. Why tone and why vibratory rate is that, and we believe, and science has proven, that every entity, every being, whether it is animate or inanimate, has a vibratory rate. The exception to that are items that exist at what is known as absolute zero, which is nearly 300 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. At that point, the molecules quit vibrating or slow to a point that it is almost impossible to measure. Other than that, the rocks, the leaves, the trees, a house, a person, an animal, an insect, we all vibrate. We all have a vibratory rate. Consequently, so does all of the astral bodies. And until recently, we were unable to measure it. But I'm going to show you an example of that here in just a second. The second item is from book 2 or course 2, chapter 2, serial lesson 46, tone quality, how each of the astral objects expresses itself, how much and how it is a positive and negative. And this is where it kind of combines with the later two of power and harmony and disharmony. But the quality is the clarity. It is the ability for it to be expressed in a way that is impactful, either or both on the external and on the internal. So in the inner plane and or the outer plane. The third aspect is really power, the volume or quantity of force. And that's book 2, chapter 3, serial lesson 47. Again, spend some time understanding this. We focus particularly within Zane's methodology, and now with the computer program that's been developed for the Church of Light, we have the ability not to necessarily look at every aspect or every house or every, if you will, every and all situations. We can prioritize based upon the quantity of the force and the quality of the force. So this gives us a discerning separation that is different than most other practices, most other approaches to the horoscope. And I think this is one of the reasons that the methodology that Zane really pulled together provides us with the ability to have far greater accuracy and consistency. I'm a scientist, I'm a researcher. And one of the things that's really important to me when I look at academic sources is it something that is repeatable? And is it something that has validity? Why the methodology that we use gives the ability for two people, if they both apply the same rigor and the same approach, to come up with substantially the same information. That's exciting to me. The last part, and again, this is something that, while not unique to Zane, is something that I've never seen emphasized more in other types of approaches, is the use of harmony and disharmony. And that's in book 1, chapter 3, serial lesson 41. Now, when we get to course 10, book 10, parts 1 and part 2, you're going to see far more about this, all of these things really. But for right now, just understand these fundamentals, because these 4 pieces of information truly are critical and provide us with insight that is consistent. So let's take a look at them. Tone or rate of vibration. Every planet radiates a particular rate. And by planet, we're talking about the sun, which we know is not a planet. We'll just say astral bodies, a vibration or frequency. And again, this information is covered in book 2. For those of you unfamiliar, NASA actually did, and this is why you can download this presentation. She put it in the chat. And you can go to that website and you can hear the sounds from the surface of the sun. They translated it into music. And it is pretty amazing. And what they found is that each constellation, each astral body, be it a planet, be the moon, be whatever, has a vibratory rate that actually can be reproduced in an audible form within the frequency range of our hearing. This validates what Zane and many of the other Hermetic teachers have said over the years in terms of the existence of what we call both life as we understand it, and inanimate life as we may not accept as living, but it is something that is alive in the sense of producing these vibratory rates, and it has an impact on us. Have you noticed that when you are with someone that's very positive, or a group of people that's very positive, that your spirit, your essence is raised up to that level? Conversely, if you are around a group of individuals or a situation or a circumstance that's very negative, that you are brought down to that. Now, psychologically, there are a number of factors that we could look at and say that these are influences, but fundamentally, what I have understood and what I believe that science is finding more and more is that this has principally to do with the vibratory rate expressed. That a disharmonious vibratory rate is a lower frequency and is impactful upon us, whereas a harmonious or positive is a higher, more power, and can be more powerful, but do not discount that disharmonious situations and or planets or aspects can have a negative impact, because indeed they can. So again, I encourage you to go to that NASA website just to hear it if you've not. Tone quality. Let's look at the reference the table of essential deities. And what you find is that there, for each planet or each astral body, there are states of sounding, because each planet is reflecting the sound, like a sounding board for the corresponding sign it is found. So you've got a planet, let's say the sun. The home is the sign it rules, and you'll see constructive characteristics manifested. For the sun, that'd be Leo, is its home rule. Its detriment is the opposite from the home, and it's discordant. And for instance, that would be for Aquarius. Its exaltation is the highest expression of the positive trace. And you'll often see this in a trine, and it's reflected by Aries in this case. Now, the degree of fall, and there's some controversy on this, but the degree of fall is the opposite from the exaltation, and the controversy is really whether the semi-square is representing this in discord. that may or may not be true. There seems to be some discussion around that. But just know when you see a sign, an astral body that is in the opposite from its exaltation, that you want to be on the lookout and be aware that there's a possible negative influence. And again, all these are expressed based upon the sound or the sign or the house that it may be found in. The harmony, in the case of the sun, is represented by Sagittarius, represented and most often expressed in the sextile, and the inharmony, the opposite from the harmony, is represented by Gemini. Now, you go through this and you memorize it along with the degrees that it is impactful upon. It is significant information that should not be ignored and oftentimes is ignored. We often think that a planet, a house, or a sign is only important if it is on the ascendant or the midheaven, or possibly in our house where we find the sun in our for our birth date. But just recognize that all these can and do have interesting and often meaningful aspects that need to be examined. Again, any one of these things in itself may not be a critical element, but it's just one of those elements that you need to take into consideration. Now, also, tonal volume and quality is related to the table of incidental dignities. This is certain houses by nature are more impactful than others. So very powerful, the 1st, the 10th, the 7th, and the 9th. So if you're looking at not only a natal, but a progressed chart, it's kind of important to understand where the signs, where the aspects, where the planets all fall in what houses, to see, again, what the possible impact of that is. Now, with the computer program, a lot of this is explained for you, but do not rely solely upon the computer program. It is a tool, and the tools also need and should have interpretation and validation. So if you see something that for whatever reason within the computer program that may not be consistent to what you understand, ask the question and research it, because you may find that there was an anomaly, there was a glitch. And so you don't want to draw an inaccurate conclusion because of the fundamentals that for whatever reason were not properly expressed. Powerful, we've got the 11th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 12th houses. Feeble, the 2nd and 3rd, which is very interesting. Very feeble, the 5th and the 6th. Again, these do not, and so especially for the feeble and the very feeble, do not discount them. Because again, you may find that because of aspects that planets represent can overcome otherwise a lower, in this case, lower power being expressed, and may actually boost them up more powerful than something would be in the 1st house or the 11th house. So again, just understand and look. So what aspects are important, or what is an aspect? An aspect is when you've got two planets that are in certain configurations expressed in terms of degrees of separation. This can also, you can look at an aspect potentially also being the cusp of a house. So there's lots of ways it can be defined. Some of the most powerful would be the conjunction, where you've got two planets that are within a certain degree of each other. Matter of fact, that's even understood and expressed. If you look at the table of aspects and their orbs, for instance, within, for a conjunct, if it is within the number of aspect, if it's within 0 degrees or 1 degree, it's going to have a significant impact. the closer they are together, the more impactful it is. Also, and it's considered to be potentially positive, but remember, just because something is deemed to be harmonious or disharmonious does not mean it's positive or negative necessarily. You have to look at particulars in and of itself to understand it. That's why building this 3-ring notebook, I think, so important, because there are many details that, if you will, override a general rule. So if you have two, what would be considered disharmonious signs like Mars and Saturn that are conjunct, that probably means it's disharmonious, but depending on its arrangement where it is, could be less disharmonious than what might be otherwise. A sextile is 60 degrees of separation, is often considered, again, a positive or harmonious situation, but it can be more or less. These are not all or none situations. They are on a continuum from very harmonious to very disharmonious, and they all fall somewhere in between that. A trine is 120 degrees, and it is considered to most often be harmonious. A square is 90 degrees. It is often considered to be disharmonious. Opposition's 180 degrees. It is considered to be disharmonious. Now, look at the relationship here. If you will, a 60 and 120 is separated by 60 degrees. So 0, 60, 120. Whereas the disharmonious are based on 90 degrees. And there are other aspects in between, if you will. But we're looking at the primary ones here. And if you refer to that table of aspects and their orbs, you can find the degrees of separation, because it's really important to understand, especially as you're coming into that aspect or you're leaving that aspect, whether the positive or negative information or relationship is increasing or decreasing. So you need to know not only the, if you will, the quality of it and the power of it, but whether it's increasing or decreasing. And again, this is something you really should commit to memory and to understand this, or always know where to look. I found that particularly in research, you want to have a basic memorization of the principles, but be able to quickly refer to the areas and to the pages that are necessary to gain more information. And yes, I see we have lots of comments. And thank you for responding to these. We'll make sure and cover those at the end as well. Now, how do you judge any chart? There are essentially 7 steps. And this can be found again in the first chapter. I want to take a look at it. You want to look at the planetary distribution and the aspects. So by planetary distribution, how many planets are above the ecliptic? How many are below? The more that are above are represented as items that are known to others and are not deemed secrets, if you will. The more that are below may be more hidden information. Now, the more to the left of the midheaven are those that will be more impactful, that you have control of or influence of primarily. Those to the right of the midheaven, you will find that the situation or circumstances may be more dictating, and the use of spiritual alchemy will be even more important to overcome the influence of those others. So understanding that planetary distribution and the aspects that are represented on first look are important. Matter of fact, what I do when I run a chart is I go through this process before I even get much into the results from the program. I also want to look at the quality of the influence. I want to look at the power, the astrodynes that are presented. I want to know what are the most powerful planets, what are the most powerful aspects, what are the most powerful houses and what are the most powerful signs, both natal and progressed. If I'm looking at transits or minor progressed, their power must be weighed and relate only to the information contained in the natal and the progressed. The transits in and of themselves, as Zane talks about, are not inconsequential, but they are very limited in terms of their influence. But I think the example that he gives is pretty important, is that you can have a powder keg, you can have an explosive device that is all set based upon the natal and or progressed information. The transits can represent the match to the fuse or the spark to the electric wire. The transit in and of itself, or the minor progressed in and of itself, is not the primary explosion or the primary element of change, but it is the spark that can initiate. So don't discount the transits, but primarily do not rely on them. This is probably the greatest weakness of the astrology charts that you read in the newspaper and others. Either they're so general based upon a person's sun sign that they are generalized to the point of not being consequential, or it's based upon transit moves that may or may not have any influence or impact upon your life. The chart must be taken as a whole. Now, triplicity is probably a topic that we're not going to have time to discuss. Go back in chapter 1 and take a look at that and find what that means in terms of how it's interpreted. I think you'll find it to be very, very interesting. Step 4, the Department of Life, chapter 3, serial lesson 47, book 2. We're looking at what houses that the aspects or the planets or the power is focused in. Do not discount the progressed. Do not look solely at the natal, particularly if you're dealing with someone that's middle-aged or older. The progressed itself can start to have greater influences once a person is past the age of 40 or 50. And that's just my personal experience, that it becomes, I think, more consequential and something that must be taken into account. The navel is your base personality. It is never overwritten, but I have found that the progressed, as we age and mature, becomes more impactful, particularly if there's been substantial changes in our lives. So you want to take the two together and understand, particularly when we look at the departments of life and the power that may be represented, the quality of the influence. Nature of the planetary energy expressed, chapter 2, serial lesson 46, book 2. Again, this is pretty self-evident. You can take a look at this. And then in step 6, look at the house ruler, where it is. If it is in the house, that is obviously could be one of the most impactful, or if it's in exaltation. Look at where that house ruler is. If you find that there is one house that is particularly harmonious or disharmonious, and really dissect that and understand, well, what's the impact of that and what it means. Step 7, the prominence of each planet with number and nature of each aspect. Not all aspects are equal. Some are more powerful than others, some are more involved, some are more consequential now or in the future. It's also, when you look at this, the way our program operates is that it shows you when each of these aspects are at their greatest influence. When does it peak? When does it begin? When does it end? And you start setting thresholds to say, well, when do I look at this? When do I believe that this starts becoming consequential? And again, as we get into book 10, course 10, we'll start to examine that on a greater level and how to interpret that. It is practice, practice, and more practice. in understanding. Some of it is intuitive, but a great deal of it is just methodology and process. To really consistently approach it in the same way, in the same light, so that you get consistent results. All right, so let's continue on. So the next two are the only two chapters about Horary astrology. So what's the definition? Can someone give me a definition of a Horary chart? Either raise your hand or unmute and speak up, because I can't see everybody. Lenora, what do you think is the definition of a Horary chart? You're muted. There you go.
Oh, okay. Horary, to me would be more of the natural type of explanation versus esoteric. So even the houses can be a little bit more elaborate when it's esoteric, something that you want to know spiritually. Horary is like the normal life scenarios. Am I right?
Okay. Well, you know, there's a lot of interpretation here. June, what do you think?
I think an Horary chart is a chart that you set up for a certain specific either question, situation, or something that's happening now. And the Horary gives you an answer usually. Like if a client calls you up and asks a certain, shall I sell my house today, put it on the market? You do a chart for that. And you decide, that tells you what the stars tell you about when you should put your house on the market.
Yes, it's almost like a yes or no. Riona, what did you say? Yeah, so you had a hand up.
Well, I agree with everything that she just said. That was pretty much where I was going with this. And my understanding, it is more of a type of astrology that would be used for divination, with that understanding that you explained earlier, that it's just a potential of what would be in the future. And I also was under the understanding that Horary somehow meant like to the hour, or the word hour was somehow involved with that, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
It is. That's great, because the definition itself is really based around situational. So it's specific situations. It's not a birth, it is kind of a birth chart, but it's not about a person, place, or thing as much as about a situation with a question that often is answered by yes or no, or degrees of yes or no. Can it be more than that? Absolutely. And it's one that when you look at the chapter 3, chapter 4 that's represented here, that it gets to be a little bit different in terms of how the houses express. So I guess that leads me to the question of what's the difference then between a Horary chart and a tarot reading? Vega, what do you see as the difference between the two?
Well, like you said, I think a yes or no question on the tarot cards can be very much like a horary question. You're asking a very specific question about a specific event. So it would be either. You could do either.
And given how, is any other comments on that? Because I think this is a real interesting question that I don't necessarily have good clarity on. To me, I think you swing one way or the other. I have a preference for tarot readings for more situational. But I believe that you can get as much or maybe even additional information from a chart. I do both. And I found when they're not consistent, that causes me to pause and be concerned. More often than not, they're dead on consistent. And to me, that is, I think, extremely interesting and important, because we look for consistency. But like Zane says, this is a practice that takes, it's just different. And it may be one that you want to delay pursuing for now, until you learn and understand more of the natal, and later on we'll talk about mundane astrology, if you will, the astrology of place. So this may be one you want to put on the back burner. If you have an interest in it, obviously pursue it. But I would say, I would encourage you to make sure it's consistent with your tarot reading. And when those two agree, I think you've got something, because remember, the future is not fixed. We have dynamic, dramatic control of what's going to happen, which I think is extremely important. So when would each be best used? I think it's personal preference and understanding. So I'm not sure that there's a good answer to that.
Well,
Other than go ahead, June.
I think too that I use Ori more for clients that have been like long-term clients. Somebody that I'm not or haven't done their natal chart or done a reading for them ever before. I don't think Ori is a good thing to start with a person on that.
I agree. Now, Zane kind of talks about it, but I don't think there's the detail that he meant. I think he meant to be far more. Just like the tarot card, a period of meditation, a period of contemplation, and getting your mind in the right place before you either do a tarot deck or you do a Horary chart is critical. Because what you're doing is you're putting yourself to access that universal knowledge and to identify with that individual. If you fail to do that, my experience has been that I will get biased information and inaccurate information. I think, like June said, to use it just early on when you don't know the person and you've not been engaged, I think is problematic. RJ, I see you have your hand up.
Hey, I remember reading something about psychokinetics having something to do with the tarot. And so I wanted to know, how does that work with a chart, with a horary chart, or is it supposed to? Because when you talk about having possibly two different results.
Yep. It is more subjective in the interpretation, is my understanding of this. So consequently, the psychokinetic connection between you and that other person is required for you to have clear understanding of that universal knowledge and of their experience and their needs. Because the Horary charts are less defined and more subjective than a natal or a mundane chart. It's subject to more interpretation. And so just like connecting on a tarot, that you just got to be in the right state.
Okay.
Can I answer your question?
I think so.
Okay. Vega or Peg, can you enlighten us any more on this?
I really didn't hear the question. Can we repeat, please?
She talked about the psychokinetic connection that we talk about with use when we talk about tarot. Is it the same psychokinetic connection between you and the individual to create a Horary chart?
You know, I wonder about that myself when you do it by hand, because, you know, the book 8 has the calculations on how to do a chart, which is one of the hardest things for astrologers to do. And so now that we have these horoscope programs, I wonder how much of a psychic connection we have to that chart versus the tarot cards. I use them both, but I tend to use tarot cards if I'm asking a specific question, like how's my vacation going to be, or that kind of thing.
Yeah. And, you know, it's really interesting you say that, because that reminds me that one of my good friends, who's not here today, my best friend, he will not do a Horary chart on the computer. He will hand cast it.
Right.
because he feels that he has to have that psychic connection. He has to have that touch, exactly like the tarot cards. So that's an excellent point. And I agree. I guess I'm just a little lazy for, I can't imagine that in the 60s and 70s and the early 80s, the work that was involved to put all these charts together. Just think of going through, when we get into book 10, you'll start to have the OMG factor of saying, I don't know how we could do this on a computer, but you have to make sure that you understand how to do it so that there's no misinterpretation.
Okay.
All right, let's go on to that. So here's the process. As I say, until we get after book 10, this might be something you want to delay. But if you proceed, you want to create a chapter or a section in your loose leaf loose leaf notebook to outline the steps and meaning, because this is a different process. The houses have different meanings. The planets, the astral bodies have different meanings, and it's a broader context. It is somewhat more comparable to when we go through mundane, but it is less specific, I've found. The third step is clearly identify a very specific and concise question and note the time of the question. You have to have an accurate time, but even more important, you have to have an accurate question. It can't be vague. It can't be slippery. It's got to be something that is either a yes or no, or that the answer is a specific outcome. And that doesn't seem like it'd be hard, but it really can be, especially if you're dealing with clients or even yourself, to really say, well, what are you really asking here? You're kind of hitting all these areas, but what do you really want to know? What is it you're trying to understand? And then when did this question start? Because the time is specific. And on page 50, which will not correspond to, depending on the version you use, you'll see some of this. And again, the meaning of the houses are in this whole chapter, in chapter 4, chapter 5 in the serial lesson, that you'll start seeing that the houses and the astral bodies do have more and different meanings that are not necessarily consistent with what you would find in mundane or within natal astrology. So serial lessons 90 and 91, recording your notebook, the meaning of the association of each house, questions and outcome. Keep track of what you do. The only way you get more accurate is by understanding where you may have missed or where you hit. You want to have as detailed a record as possible so that you can sharpen and become more precise. You know, one of the things I do, you can't really see it, I keep one of those, asked from, who's it? Lendwick, the Church of Light has these daily planners that give astral information. I note on every day significant events that occur, not only for future reference to come back to, but if I have a question associated with it, whether I'm going to do Horary or whether I'm going to do a tarot spread, or I'm going to do both, I want to have that base information, because my memory, I won't remember. I'll confuse the day, I'll confuse the time. So the more that you can document, the better you are. And take a look at additional insight that can be gained. This is a very dense, I know no other word to use. This is just packed with information, and extracting that information and internalizing it, personalizing it, and figuring out how to use it really becomes critical. Now, chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 8 are about chart construction. Now, one of the things you're going to need to acquire, and this will be something that, given we're approaching book 10, you probably want to get this sooner or later, is an ephemeris. An ephemeris is I think the one I have is 1950 to 2050. So it's a 100-year view, day by day, of astral positions. I also have one prior to 1950. So if I'm working on a natal chart of someone that was born before 1950, I can make sure and get accurate information of what the relationships were. Or when we get into mundane astrology and look at the history or the charts of nations, many nations were founded before 1950. You'll need this information because it may or may not be easily found otherwise. So obtain an ephemeris. The one trick of using an ephemeris is accurate time conversion. Depending on where you live, most ephemeras are based upon Eastern Standard Time, though there are some that are both Eastern and Pacific. Do not get confused in terms of times that are represented. Also, positions are often represented at 12 noon or midnight. So for the ephemeris that you obtain, and again, Vega, does Church of Light have ephemerises in stock?
No, we do not carry them as a, as a book that it's in our library.
Okay. There's not one that's recommended over another, in my view. You need to look at them and just totally understand how the information is represented and how to use it. Because if you're off by 3 hours, it can have a significant impact. Or if you view something that is midnight rather than noon, again, you want to make sure that you understand this. When you get into book 10, course 10, and you have to construct a chart, you will definitely need the ephemeris. Information will be given to you in the materials, but the more that you have and start working on this, and begin to get familiar with it, the more comfortable you'll be. Also, you'll find in page 119 to 120 that various vocations, that the term he uses was ventures, are ruled by certain astral bodies or influenced by certain astral bodies. And this is fascinating to me. Pull up here because I was just kind of surprised by this. Again, going back and rereading it. So timber may be cut while the moon is decreasing seasons better and will not warp or decay so readily if cut while the moon is in Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius. Avoid Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So there's a whole lot of information that you also will see reflected in a farmer's almanac, which was called Common or Conventional Wisdom. Much of the farmer's almanac was based upon astrological and, if you will, astrology concepts and precepts, the position of things or hermetic perceptions. So look at that list. I do not look at it often enough, and I go back and I see and I think, oh my gosh, if I had only looked at this, and if it will, committed to memory, or again, written within the calendar to be aware of certain events and certain things, I would have been much better off. Because what we talk about here and why we practice these hermetic principles is that we are aware and that we have the opportunity to influence. Not that we are, because the future is not predestined. Our outcomes are not predestined, and we have a significant impact. All right, chapter 7 and 8, serial lessons 86 and 36 are about how a chart is constructed. Again, you'll use a computer most of the time. I encourage you to actually cast some by hand. There's some blanks that are represented that you can get these online. You'll see that you can spend several hours casting a chart. And if you make one mistake early on, it carries all the way through. But you need to have the experience of doing this just to understand the process. computers are not 100% accurate. And you may find that there's some inconsistencies. And if something looks weird, you have the ability to check and catch it yourself. All right. So we have come up to our hour of time.
Mhm.
This is a lot of information. It's almost overwhelming amount of information, even when we go through it the second, third, fourth, or nth time. You will, obviously, as you're going through it for the first time, gain information enough to be successful on the exam. But as with all of these books, the real learning comes when you've read everything, and then you go back and you start seeing what you missed.
Yeah.
And the cross references, both forwards and backwards, of how this all interrelates. That our Hermetic philosophy, the approach that we take, we are integrated with our environment. We're integrated with each other. We are not an entity that stands alone. We need each other. We benefit from each other. And I wish you the best in terms of work on this book. And we all stand open for questions here after the closing ceremony and afterwards, as you have questions. So Viega, would you like to go ahead and do the closing ceremony? Then we'll do a 30 minutes of question and answers.
Great. You have a couple of really good ones in chat. All right, folks, feet on the ground, nice deep breath. Eternal brothers and sisters, we are now about to close the Church-alike meeting in the customary manner, and in so doing, let us consider seriously the kind of life it is fitting a brother and a sister of the life should live. We must each leave this meeting to go about our daily duties, but unless we take with us some higher thought and nobler purpose, we have spent our time here in vain. For knowledge lacking goodness leads to naught but self-undoing. Each brother and sister has pledged himself or herself to put forth an effort to alleviate physical and mental suffering, to dispel ignorance, and to spread truth. Therefore, even as we would be helped by those of our religion who are more enlightened, let us make every effort to assist others, and let each so conduct himself or herself as to be an example of moral purity, radiating life, light, and love upon their endeavors. I will pronounce the benediction. O thou eternal spirit, in whom we live, move, breathe, and have our being, dismiss us now with thy blessings. And as we travel along our several ways, let ministers of thine guard our footsteps and light our pathway, that we may not stumble in our blindness. From our hearts, we thank those who have assisted in our researches. And now as we depart, we consecrate our efforts to the cause of truth and beneficence. So shall it be. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to shut off the recording and we're going to have questions and answers at this point. Okay?